20 years, we've been having this discussion, and we know what the answer is or what needs to be done, but we don't get it done. So my fear is we're still talking about the what versus the how. And I wonder if 20 years from now, I'll be sitting there having exactly the same conversation. So I'd love to hear from some of you, what is the how? What can we learn from Rwanda, from other experiences, but more about the how to get this done in Africa than the what? Thank you.
Is it possible to answer that question before we go to the audience?
Acha, before you answer how, you have to answer what. And I'm not even sure that you have answered the what. So let me give you an example. So we're now talking about the energy transition, which will depend a lot on a number of minerals. Maybe there are 3 or 4, I think. And are you certain that countries owning those minerals are not going to make the mistake which countries exporting oil and gas have not made? I'm not sure about that. So if we're going to say, this is how we do something, but what are you doing in the first place? So, how do I put this to you? Every single country in Africa I visited, and I visited all of them except one, has a strategy, 30-year strategy, 40-year strategy, all right? You are right, where they fail is on implementation. But often it is because the what itself has not been well thought out, all right? So it is important to answer how, but you must also answer what are you going to do. I'm not certain that in many countries, the what has been answered. Okay, just an example. I'll be very short, please. We all know, like my own country, that we're entering this stage 3 of the transition on the demographic cycle. We're entering that phase where the size of the labor force will probably begin to be bigger and bigger, and the number of children and elderly people getting fewer. They call demographic dividend, the economists, all right? What is the one thing you have to do? You have to invest in capabilities. People say education. Capabilities, so that, in fact, that labor force is capable, has the knowledge to be able to be usefully employed. But what I've been doing in Africa, we've been targeting numbers. How many numbers are in school? How many children are completing school? But now we need to worry about learning outcomes. What are they learning? What are they coming out with? That is a what question, because the what which was answered was, let us have more children in school. And as in Mali, you look at children coming out of secondary school, they're hardly literate. The what was not answered. The what was not the numbers as inputs. The what was, what are they going to learn? The learning outcomes. And I believe it is such an issue for almost every African country. So we have to ask the question, so what are we going to do? Here in Rwanda, the census showed that, I hope I'm right, 78% of the population, I think, are under 35. I hope I'm right. About 38% are under 15. So we are at that point where we can actually answer that question, i.e., what kind of capabilities are we going to generate in that generation? That is a what. Once we have answered the what, we can decide how. What do we do to make sure that the children come out with capabilities? But if the what, which has been answered as in many African countries, is get as many kids to school as possible, that is the beginning to a problem. Now, I'm not saying that there are no implementation issues, or tons of them. Tons of them. Implementation is a problem. But it's important we answer the right question. So I've been...
Thank you. No, that's
I apologize.
Makes sense. And Boris as well, he did mention some of the issues we have, like we have been discussing this and...
Excuse me, maybe it is causing the disruption. I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to ask you for the floor to say something. And that is to do with what Acha asked and what Kaberuka answered. I'm not sure something was not lost in between. If I may, or maybe it's me who did not pick it correctly. Even the what and the how, actually in theory have been answered, or at least people know. And that's what we get from these discussions every time, whether it is here, or Davos, or Addis, or Singapore, or New York, or wherever. We've been places, all of us. And we've been in search of what is it that we can do in Africa to put the transformation journey on track as we wish to. So actually the problem which Donald talked about also is that implementation. It's actually the main issue. You said that you are not saying that there are no implementation issues. Actually, this is the problem. Forget about the how or the what. The how and the what have been answered by you even now on the sitting there in the panel. They have been answered before, several times, for years. When it comes to doing things, we either do nothing or do the wrong things. That's the implementation. So at first I thought that's what Achareke was alluding to. So how many conferences, how many experts, how many times do we have to discuss what and how? Because we've discussed that for years, for long, for many times. But the question is, when do we get to do what we have even agreed is what is needed to be done? It's implementation. I rest my case.
Thank you, Excellency. Yes, Dr. Celestin.
Clementine, the moderator, is putting me in a difficult situation to try to respond to that. I'm Cameroonian, so I believe in conspiracy theories. So you have something against me. I would still dare say that I'm on the side of Dr. Kaberuka on this one, simply because, yes, we've seen solutions, we've heard ideas at conferences, but many times we also have wrong ideas in the books, and we implement the wrong ideas. So I still think that in some questions, the what is still relevant. What should we do? What should we not do? I see in many African countries, I was very happy among many nice jobs that I had. One of the most meaningful was to be chief economist, vice president of the African Development Bank, because it was for me really the opportunity to serve the continent. I had bigger jobs before that, but that one was so far to me the most meaningful. And I could tell you, Mr. President, that I had interaction with a lot of ministers and prime ministers and presidents who believe in the wrong ideas. So I think that the what, in some situations, is still relevant. Now, there is a former professor of mine who's also my colleague now in Boston called Michael Porter. I've written something in what I call the implementation gap, this question. And he told me, well, he's an expert on strategy. And he says that if you have a good strategy and the wrong implementation, it means that you had the wrong strategy to begin with, and you didn't know that. I said, please explain that again. He said, no, a good strategy should have implementation, strategy, and constraint embedded in it. That you cannot have a good strategy and the wrong implementation. So you need to think about all of them at the same time. Okay? So I just wanted to mention that. Now, quickly, the solution, I think, is to train and build capabilities. And I very much like, again, what Dr. Kaberuka said, which is not just education. It's the relevant type of education, which reflects the needs of the economy, of the society at a given moment. It also means training leaders, but not only leaders, but also training managers. They are not the same things. You sometimes have leaders who have the vision. Then you need to have behind them or below them or around them a large group of managers who actually run things on time and have to learn how to deliver things on time. Not all managers are leaders, are visionary. So I think that when we are reflecting about our institutions to train people, whether they're universities, school, primary schools, or vocational school, we need to have these ideas in mind to really have different type of skills that will be needed. Thank you.
I still have an issue. Because not only have these things been discussed, the what and the how, we also not only have experience of places where this gap has been bridged. We have references to make in different parts of the world how things have happened. So that means the what, to an extent, has been answered. Because we're asking the what of two kinds. What do we have to do ourselves? Rwanda, the continent. And then there is the what that has been answered in other places by other people to get to where they are that we want to be. So, of course, countries have different contexts. But this does not preclude the point I'm trying to make. Saying, then you learn from the experience of other places who have answered the what in their context. That brings you closer to understand the what in your context. And therefore, do it. Therefore, what I'm saying, and really what I thought Acha was also referring to, whether it is answering the what or the how, cannot remain in perpetuity as a question being asked without coming to a closure of saying, my what to my problem, my how to deal with the problem is this one. Because I have learned from other experiences, even of different contexts, but I have been hearing, I have learned from my own experience as to what and how. You know, we have even gone to the extent, precisely something you covered as well here on the panel. We have even gone to the extent where we are now being told from outside as to what and how. And the people just go for that because somebody has told you the very circumstances you have explained very well. So we have to sit back and people walk to our countries, well, they come by air or by ship, or they did that long ago. But they tell people, you must do this, you need to do this. And in fact, tie that to the money or the means they are giving you to be able to do that. And people have shifted their minds from what they actually know that should be done, that we have discussed and debated, to what they are being told they must do because they need that money that comes with it to implement it. So there is something lacking on our side in terms of ownership of ideas, or even learning to do what we have already learned that works elsewhere. This is why I had to push back a little bit.
Yes. Thank you, Excellency. Dr. Lopez and Boris, you have requested the floor, and then Dr. Lopez. Boris.
Non, je veux juste ajouter quelque chose. Bon, quitte à peut-être rendre le débat un peu plus compliqué, c'est au fond, la question pour moi, c'est qui? C'est-à-dire, quel Africain, quel type d'Africain pour appliquer quelle solution, hein? Vous venez de dire, Célestin, les solutions pertinentes, on les trouve, mais en réalité, elles ne sont pas appliquées, mais c'est peut-être donc nous le problème. Et ça me renvoie au début de votre intervention, la question du self-esteem, quoi. Ouais. La question de la confiance en soi, et le fait que, quoi que nous fassions, nous le faisons en comparaison avec l'Occident, sous le regard de l'Occident, pour prouver à l'Occident que nous ne sommes pas ce que vous avez dit, ce que vous croyez. Ça veut dire que nous vivons quand même sous le poids d'une histoire millénaire. Elle nous poursuit, elle nous traque, elle nous embarrasse, elle nous empêche d'aller de l'avant. Et ici, puisqu'il y a beaucoup de jeunes dans la salle, je ne peux pas résister à la tentation vraiment de parler de ça. C'est Cheikh Anta Diop, mon maître, 3 ans, mais vraiment mon maître, hein, 3 ans avant sa mort, il fait une conférence à Niamey, restez dans les mémoires. Et les jeunes défilent et lui posent des questions sur sa philosophie, ses théories et tout ça. À un moment donné, il est désespéré. Et ça se voit sur son visage, il leur dit, mais finalement, vous les jeunes Nigériens, tout ce que vous me demandez, c'est, mais quand donc les Européens, les Occidentaux, valideront-ils votre pensée? Seront-ils d'accord avec vous? Et il ajoute, c'est que pour vous, la vérité doit être blanche. Et je pense qu'au fond, ce qui nous empêche d'aller, mais ça relève de l'inconscient, ce qui nous empêche d'aller de l'avant, je pense qu'il y a un peu de ça. Et c'est dans la même conférence, c'est par là que je vais terminer, qu'il fait à ces jeunes une exhortation célèbre. Il leur dit, armez-vous de science jusqu'aux dents, car à connaissance égale, la vérité finit toujours par triompher. Et donc, oui, Célestin, c'est ce que tu as dit, quoi. C'est-à-dire la question de notre rapport à la connaissance, au fond, de notre refus de l'acquérir, avec des étudiants qui demandent du Louis Vuitton plutôt que des livres. C'est ça. Et je pense que vraiment, et ça, je m'adresse vraiment aux jeunes, quoi. Le problème, c'est un problème psychologique. Nous devons relire Fanon. C'est un problème, oui, c'est un problème finalement de notre rapport avec notre propre histoire. Nous n'avons pas nous nous sommes libérés, nous n'avons pas soldé tous les comptes. Quoi.
Merci.
Voilà.
Merci, Boris. Dr. Lopez?
I wanted to react to the President's remarks by mentioning that there was a famous Japanese economist, Nakamoto, that was the first to try to interpret the success of Japan transformation as an industrial nation. And he developed this theory of the flying geese, which the economists study a lot. And the flying geese is basically based on the metaphor of the geese flying in a V formation. And the way they do that is because they have a leader, a very clear leader, and the others try to basically navigate the difficulties of the wind, taking into account the leader's direction. But the leader, because it's in front, gets a bit more difficulties after a while, because it's more exposed, and eventually one of the others can replace the leader. But you cannot replace the leader if you don't learn from the leader. And this is very much applicable to transformation. So you have to do different from the ones who precede you. But you have also to take into account the ones that preceded you. Historically, our transformation is very much influenced by the group of countries that have succeeded in that transformation more recently, and those are the Asian, Southeast Asian countries and China. Because 30 years ago, we are at the same levels of GDP per capita, and now, it's a distance is quite considerable. So if you take that lesson into account, Acha, I don't think the issue is about the how and the what, but rather, how do you make sure that you learn from those who precede you and you have the capacity to actually instill some novel dimensions. And this requires leadership. We go back to the same discussion. And leadership, I wrote a book some years back that was titled Ownership, Leadership, and Transformation. And it was to try to demonstrate that you cannot transform if you don't have those two ingredients, the leadership and the ownership. And the ownership is very much a reaction at that time to the fact that all of a sudden, the international organizations, the bilateral donors, were descending on Africa to say, now you need to do ownership. They were telling us to do ownership, but they defined what ownership was. So it was quite an amazing paradox. So the donors are telling you that you should exercise ownership, but they are telling you what ownership is. So it's like, to just make an anecdote of it. I don't want to insult Celestin, that was in one of those organizations. It was about, this is the policy, and if you implement it right, you have exercised ownership. But we tell you what the policy is. So what is this? So if we talk about implementation, we can fall into this trap. And I always remember, and I like to mention it all the time, an evaluation done by the IMF evaluation department in 2001 about the structural adjustment programs. It was a comprehensive program evaluation. And the evaluators, and this is coming from the IMF, it's not coming from radicals like me, was saying that in fact the programs of structural adjustment had failed. And they attributed that failure to a number of elements. I remember some, just to share with you. Cognitive bias on the part of the IMF staff. Group thinking. There was one more interesting finding. They said that the data was only used if it confirmed already established policy. In my books, that is called dishonesty. And it was like that, coming from the IMF evaluation department. So this ownership is being transformed into sort of a myth. But in fact, what we have to address is very much the way you put it, Boubacar. It's to address this capacity to be independent. And that's basically the secret of implementation, is being independent, being courageous, and being capable of confronting some of these difficulties. But obviously you cannot do it without addressing the shortcomings of human life, such as corruption and other unethical practices that are always lingering around, and that you will have to have the capacity to actually stay focused and have this determination. Determination is really the word, because a lot of confrontation is going to be in front of us, but it is the determination that is going to make a difference. And that goes all the way to the way we look into the economy, because competitive advantages, like you were saying, Maris, is based also in interpretation that is dynamic. Because a lot of our competitive advantages are in being capable of being independent. Like the South Koreans decided to have a shipping industry. And at the time, everybody said, that's a white elephant. You're not going to give you money for anything in that sector because you don't have iron ore, you have zero skills on shipping, you don't have any infrastructure to do shipbuilding, you are not really competitive enough in relation to the economies in your neighborhood, and they went on with the list. And you don't have money, you don't have capital. But they decided that they were going to invest on shipping. They started and failed.
Thank you.
For 1 decade, they failed. And they failed the second decade. Today, they are the second largest shipping industry in the world.
Thank you.
Me to take more of your time, since I missed the morning session, so I'm trying to compensate this one. The ownership still comes back to the ownership of what? The ownership of how? It always come to that. But let me tell you just a simple story we have in all kinds of stories in our traditions and so on and so forth. Even animals learn. There is a story here in Rwanda about the leopard. The leopard went for the kill of the animals, of the herdsmen and the women in Rwanda. So it tried to kill a calf, and people heard noises and went and saved the calf. So they went back to the house and they were celebrating the calf survived. And they started talking to each other. And the leopard was still nearby, behind the hut, listening. And the people said, inside the hut were saying, you know, if this leopard had gone for the neck, we wouldn't be having our calf. So from that time, the leopard went for the neck. And every time it goes for the kill, it gets its kill. So how can we be there listening to what makes the kill and we don't do it? That's the summary of it anyway, so thank you for...
Thank you, Excellency. I would like to ask Dr. Donald to kind of summarize and close out this session for us. Give us some of your thoughts on the final position on this, because it's a hot debate. How do we go about it?
That's a big job for me. Huh? I'm not sure I'm the right person to do that. But let me say this. I fear now that because of the weakening of our economies during COVID period, because of this synchronized crisis which has happened around the world, around us, our economies have become so weakened, that, for example, a country in West Africa, please no names, which was the first one to go to the IMF and begin journey of economic reforms, is back to the IMF today. Please, no names. Why? A combination of domestic indiscipline, macroeconomic indiscipline, and these external shocks. So as a result, they have lost what I call political space, fiscal space, policy space. The decisions they're now implementing are not their decisions. Why? Because during the days when things were very good, they did all the wrong things. They ticked all the wrong boxes. Massive borrowing, for example, massive spending, huge levels of the deficit, without building the resilience for when the days will be difficult. I can think now of about 14 countries in Africa who are in that phase. So the first thing I think our message we're passing here is that restoring that degree of economic independence begins by economic discipline. When you lose that discipline, you lose that ability to implement your own policies. This is what Carlos is saying. Number two, you have to exercise that discipline with a lot of equity, social equity. What is bringing many of our countries down is that in terms of getting things done, a lot of inequities are implemented. So you have sections of society who feel frustrated, so they check out. You can see that in the whole of the Sahelian belt. So I think the message which I'm hearing from here is that we are at such a point in Africa's transformation journey where we need to restore, first of all, our equal place as a partner in the global economy, able to make our own choices. It does mean we're equally wealthy, but we have the same voice. That's number one. Number two, again, this is what Celestin was saying, and our colleague here. The opportunities now in the supply chains globally, because what was happening during COVID, it's no longer about, can I rely on vaccines and food and medicine from one country? It's no longer about where is the cheapest place to produce. It is where is the most reliable place to produce. And so when a country like Rwanda begins to manufacture vaccines and maybe other medicines very soon, create an ecosystem, you are taking advantage of what has been a crisis in the global supply chains to actually make it an opportunity. That decision has been made. I think number three, which I think is equally important, is that because of the uncertainties which I was mentioning around us nowadays, and because of the weakness in international cooperation, Africa has to exercise its own agency. And here, Mr. President, I want to say, I think maybe agreeing with you here, I think the reform of the African Union and the inability of our continental organizations to function effectively is a very big break on what we're trying to do. We have got islands of excellency, like Africa's Center for Disease Control, for example, at least until recently, which was an island of excellence. But we need to get African institutions to function. Because without them, we shall be acting individually, and that is suboptimal. Now, to my friend Archer, I've seen many countries with plans done by McKinsey. They usually pay $1 million for that. I think you need to do what Celeste has been saying, please. Always attach an implementation schedule to it and timelines so that you can come late and assess what has been done. But I think we're giving here a message of hope and among the young people that if Rwanda began from such a difficult position and is where it is today, it has not resolved all the problems, but it's possible for all the African countries to exercise their own agency, even in a very difficult global environment like we're facing now.